Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Iron Coffins Part 35. Confused, I stared through the tower hatch into the black interior of the boat. All life seemed to have died, and I feared the boat would sink at any moment and ordered, "All hands on deck, ready life rafts and rescue buoys." But not a single sound came from below. The people must have been rendered unconscious by the harsh explosions. Endless seconds passed, and from some distance I heard the muffled roar of bombers preparing for a new attack. The next assault must be deadly. Then some men came up the aluminum ladder. Shaken and still dazed, they greedily breathed in the night air and threw the empty rubber boats onto the bridge. Then they jumped onto the upper deck and began inflating the boats. The gunners aimed their barrels at the invisible machines that circled our mortally wounded boat like vultures. The speed of the attack and the damage suffered prevented us from sending out a distress signal. So many of our comrades must have died at sea, silently, killed from the air and unable to utter a single word about it. U-415 lay motionless and hopelessly damaged on the sluggish, brightly lit surface, waiting for the death blow. Since the boat did not sink, I ordered the men to take cover behind the tower instead of going into the water with the inflated dinghies and being shot down like clay pigeons. I was determined to stay on board as long as the boat floated and we still had ammunition and could shoot. However, I soon realized that we were not meant to die unreported. Our radio operator managed to repair the emergency transmitter and report our destruction to headquarters. 2:23 a.m. Increasing engine noise heralded a new attack. New approach from starboard, a Sunderland. Yellow flames licked from the onboard cannons, it roared low over the bridge, dropped 4 depth charges and rushed away into the night, followed by our defensive fire. 4 deafening blasts. Again, the boat was lifted out of the water. Then, a Liberator attacked from low altitude from port ahead. Our double mounts fired immediately, emptying their magazines into the cockpit of the plane. The black monster raced over the bridge, dropped 4 canisters, howled away, and blew hot exhaust into our faces. The boat made 4 wild jumps. 4 white mushrooms rose from the starboard outer bunker. The man at the 37mm automatic held onto his weapon and fired a full load of high explosive shells into the hull of the departing bomber. A flash, and the plane crashed into the sea. Somewhere in the distance, we heard the engine noise of the Sunderland. Then, everything was very quiet. The marker buoy continued to flicker next to our boat. U-415, near death, was still afloat. Both radar warning receivers were shot away. We were without warning devices. The bridge armor was pierced. A man lay scalped by a ricochet on the bridge. The first officer of the watch groaned in pain. His back was riddled with numerous splinters. I myself felt hot sweat welling up under my cap and streaming over my face. I wiped over my eyes, and my hand was red. My white cap was riddled like a sieve. Tiny fragments had torn my scalp. Suddenly, the voice of the chief engineer came from inside the boat. "Boat is taking in water heavily through the bow compartment and galley hatch. There's severe flooding in the radio room. I'm trying to keep her afloat, provided you keep the bees off us." "Can you rig for dive?" I shouted back. "I can't promise anything. We have no power, no lights, but we'll do our best." I collapsed onto the slippery upper deck. The planks were torn open in several places. Some depth charges had landed on deck before falling into the water and exploding there. 1 canister had jumped onto an outboard bunker, leaving a deep dent. The starboard ballast bunker was torn wide open. Diesel oil poured into a thick stream from the leak and spread over the water surface. With every minute of this precarious ceasefire, the danger of a new attack increased. The boat rocked gently in the long swell, helpless and seemingly hit fatally. The next 20 or 30 minutes must bring us to the end, I thought. With every heartbeat, we expected a new attack or for the boat to sink beneath our feet. Again, the deep voice of the chief engineer. "Boat is conditionally dive ready, but only for 20 meters. 1 engine is good for 80 revolutions." "Can you keep the boat at 20 meters, Chief? Or will we plummet to the bottom?" "Can't say. We have to try." I tried it. The men climbed onto the bridge and tumbled one after the other through the round opening into the iron coffin. I watched as the upper deck slowly submerged, and when the water crept onto the bridge, I closed the hatch. Seconds later, the boat was surrounded by the floods. The interior of the boat looked like it had been hit by a tornado. In the glow of the emergency lighting, I saw the corridor blades strewn with pipes, air ducts, cables, shards of glass, hand wheels, mattresses, and tables. Water rushed in through the leak in the radio room. It streamed through the hatch in the bow compartment and through the galley hatch. Both propeller shafts were bent, the starboard shaft to the extent that it couldn't be moved. The forward batteries were ruptured, and acid flowed into the battery compartment. The radio room was destroyed. The gyro compass was wrecked, The depth echo sounding device was smashed, both air compressors demolished, both periscopes were failed and taking on water. The starboard diesel was torn from its foundations and the main bilge pump was ruined. Since the port and depth rudders couldn't be moved electrically, I ordered them to be switched to manual. Careful, gentle, silent dive. Only the hum of one electric motor and the subdued, muffled clatter of tools were audible. The trembling of nerves, the immense tension, the tremendous pressure slowly subsided. For 4 hours, the boat glided at 20 meters. Then it began to sink slowly. I monitored the movements of the boat in the control room while the chief engineer supervised the repair work. We sailed blindly, steering by the unreliable magnetic compass, expecting to plummet into the abyss at any moment. For hours, we drifted on the sharp edge between buoyancy and subsidence, along the sharp edge between life and death. The compressed air escaped from leaky lines and the incoming water slowly and steadily pulled us deeper. 10:27 a.m. A shock hit the boat at 27 meters. 2 more blows followed. We had run aground on the cliffs that protrude from the Brittany coast. An appalling situation. I had no usable periscope to orient myself. Rudder hard to port. Blow dive tank 3 briefly. Go to 270 degrees. A new impact, then another. Then a sharp scraping. The steel tube reared up. The boat quickly rose to 15 meters. New blows, unearthly grinding. The boat trembled under a new impact. It was almost thrown to the surface, where we would have only minutes to live. Then, finally, the boat swung insanely slowly on a westerly course, where I hoped to escape the deadly cliffs. 10:45 a.m. The chief engineer fell into the control room like a stone and reported the periscope in the tower repaired. I handed him the depth control and took up my post in the tower. As the glass eye finally pierced the murky water, I saw the black rock peaks menacingly looming around us from the water. On one of the grotesque rock pinnacles stood the lighthouse of Casson. It dawned on me that we were trapped in the tidal current, which was slowly pushing us toward the jagged cliffs. I forced myself back to reality and called out, "Chief, what's the highest revolutions for the port engine?" 120 revolutions. Give me 150 or we'll crash into the rocks. Suddenly, I spotted a number of low-flying twin-engine aircraft, but quickly turned the glass eye back to the lighthouse to monitor our struggle against the current. But the boat was barely making headway. It was practically stationary. Once again, I called into the control room. "Chief, I need another 50 revolutions and make it quick." "I can't take responsibility for this. The engine will break loose from its foundation," he shouted back. "To hell with your responsibility. Give me 200 revolutions or we'll be sitting on the rocks in no time and you won't come out of your tube alive." That did the trick. I felt the increased vibration in the boat. Once again, I aimed the crosshairs at one of the menacing rocks. The boat desperately forged westward, crawling forward with agonizing slowness, heading towards the exit of the trap. Minutes passed in utmost tension. Slowly, the cliffs receded astern, and then we had maneuvered past the westernmost rocks. I wiped the sweat from my neck in relief. Later, when the tides had turned, I turned U-415 back on its old southern course and reduced the revolutions of the port shaft to a safe 100. 1 p.m. Periscope death. The sky was dotted with airplanes flying in formation of 4 and 6. Land was nowhere in sight. 1:30 p.m. The chief reported that we would run out of power in less than 2 hours. It seemed that we had no other option but to scuttle the boat. But I was far from ready to give this up. I hoped to reach the new rendezvous point B1 with one last desperate push above water, using all our remaining strength to send out a distress call, run aground, and await rescue. 1:45 p.m. Periscope depth. A group of twin-engine aircraft skimmed the surface just a mile to the north. 1:58 p.m. 2 Liberators flew in from the east. I retracted the periscope and waited. 2:10 p.m. Up scope. A bump on the southern horizon convinced me that we were nearing the westernmost cliffs of Brittany, the outskirts of the coast near Brest. A quick scan, 3 twin-engine Bs had snuck up from astern. I retracted the scope as quickly as I could. 2:18 p.m. The coast was clear. The flawless blue of the sky remained unblemished, and this was our chance. 2:20 p.m. The boat broke the surface with its last bit of strength. I reached the bridge and was blinded by the sun. The portside diesel stuttered, began to smoke, and then the sluggish boat slowly gained forward momentum. Nervously, I scanned the sky. A radio operator tinkered with the buttons of the distress transmitter. After several unsuccessful attempts, he established contact with land, sent his short signal into the ether, and quickly disappeared into the boat. The signal requested escort and fire support for our nocturnal entry. Brief moments of solitude on the bridge. The boat crawled with a heavy list to the calm sea, dragging a broad flag of shimmering diesel oil traitorously behind. For a few minutes the sky remained clear and free, and without interference from the air, we reached the calculated point B1, the potential rendezvous point with the escort. I turned the boat eastward to reduce the distance to land, but our reprieve was over. 5 twin-engine aircraft darted over the northern horizon. Alarm! The boat, powerless, unable to maneuver and heavily overloaded with water seeping in, plunged headlong into the sea. A jolt, and U-415 buried its bow into the seabed. A hard impact, then it settled on an even keel in the mud. The depth gauge read 42 meters. Seconds later, a series of explosions reverberated through the boat. Water sprayed, sloshed over the decks, filled the bilges, and threatened to knock out the vital electrical systems. I contemplated the possibility of inadvertently exceeding the time limit, then the boat would be too heavy to dislodge from the bottom. The prospect of seeing land again was anything but encouraging. Hours of waiting crept by slowly, and for hours we watched the water rise, felt the air running out, and fatigue overwhelming us. 7:35 p.m. Rising water levels caused a short circuit in our power supply. The only remaining working bilge pump had failed. The possibility of freeing the boat from the bottom further diminished. The boat was as quiet as a tomb. Only the soft splashing of water was audible. I threw myself on my bunk, closed the green curtain, and pondered the few options that remained open to me. 11 p.m. I expected action from the base at any moment. I had the listening device turned on, but the only sound we heard was the sound of water seeping in. 1 a.m. Still no sign of propeller noise from the east, where the port and rescue seemed so close. I decided to wait another 2 hours and then attempt the breakthrough alone. 1:15 a.m. Faint propeller noises dead ahead. The voice of the radio operator electrified me. I pulled back the curtain, leaped into the listening room, pressed the headphone against one ear, and listened. But the noise didn't get louder. It grew fainter and fainter and then suddenly disappeared. What a huge disappointment. Suddenly, I felt the entire weight of the water above the boat physically resting on my body. Had the patrol boat stopped? Had they turned back? Were they under attack from the air? Was our location wrong? An awkward, nervous silence followed. 7:07 a.m. The noises reappeared and quickly grew louder. The thrumming roar of 2 propellers from different boats was unmistakable. I had to act quickly to prevent both vessels from turning around in an empty sea. 3:08 a.m. Blow the tanks! Compressed air hissed into the ballast tanks, but U-415 remained motionless. 3:09 a.m. Stop blowing! All hands astern! The boat was as if nailed down. 3:10 a.m. All hands ahead! Blow all ballast! U-415 didn't budge. 3:11 a.m. All hands astern! Cold sweat broke out from my pores. 3:12 a.m. All hands back to the forward compartment. Hurry, hurry, no fatigue excuses, I called out desperately. Then the compressed air ran out. 3:13 a.m. All hands astern! Then, very gently, the boat began to move. It trembled, lifted its bow, then its stern, and descended. U-415 had freed itself. With a distinct jerk, it broke through the surface and then suddenly lay still. I flipped open the hatch cover of the conning tower and leapt into the darkness. The 2 patrol boats in front of our bow immediately swung on a collision course. I quickly signaled that we were damaged and could only make 5 knots. One of the vessels then turned around and positioned itself in our wake. Taken between the 2 boats, U-415 began its slow march to Brest. 4:45 a.m. U-415 crawled, propelled by just one lame diesel engine, into the mine-infested harbor basin in front of the bunker. I stopped the engine and let the boat drift without power. With a hard rudder, I steered it into one of the poorly lit berths under the concrete ceiling. I recognized some dark figures on the pier, unreal and blurry. Then, the bow slid silently into the bunker, the lines were thrown ashore, the bow crashed against the head wall of the berth, the boat shook, and then, tamed by the lines, it lay alongside the pier. The gangway was laid from the bridge to the shore, and Winter hurried on board. He shook my hand and was visibly moved. Congratulations on your return. You better wash your face because you look like a damn pirate. Send your men to their quarters and allow yourself some rest. See me tomorrow when you're refreshed. Then he turned to my men, greeted them warmly and thoughtfully, and returned to the pier. As I crossed the gangway, I was greeted by Boddenberg and Bowell. I had thought the 2 of them were dead. However, they had managed to return to the harbor under extraordinary and difficult circumstances. The heavily damaged boats had been rescued and towed by the escort vessels that had swung into the wake of the destroyers. I climbed the slope to the base, weary, and went to my room. How lucky I must have been to escape once more, and to have been relieved of the insane suicide order in such a wonderful way. I was now convinced that U-415 had made its last voyage. The boat was a wreck, too heavily damaged to be made operational again. Now, Command would have to provide me with a new boat equipped with a snorkel. Comforted by this conviction, I showered, washing the blood and sweat from my hair, then rolled between the soft white linen sheets and fell into a death-like sleep. Severe pain forced me back into the world. It was around noon and my head ached from the shrapnel wounds. The bright sun opened my eyes and I leapt out of bed half dazed and struggled to the sickbay. A young doctor examined my wounds and said thoughtfully, "You must shave the scalp smooth to get to the root of your trouble." "Have you completely lost your mind, man?" I argued with him for a while until he finally agreed to remove only small tufts of hair and leave the rest of my head untouched. He numbed the scalp, probed and cut for nearly an hour before releasing me as treated. Relieved of the pain, I visited the scalped sailor and my wounded first watch officer. Both were in good spirits and asked me not to seek replacements. From the flood of incoming messages, radio signals and rumors, I gathered that the Allied landing on the coast of Normandy was still undecided. The Americans had formed strong bridgeheads on the Cotentin Peninsula and the British had dug in near Bayeux. Our front had suffered heavy blows but had not been broken. But while the battle raged on the coast, the remnants of the once proud submarine force continued to be shattered. In the days leading up to the fateful June 6, 25 boats had been sunk. With that, the total loss had risen to the incredible number of 440 submarines. This left us with less than 60 operational boats to combat the invasion. The majority of these boats were stationed in Norwegian and Biscay ports, but the only ones seeing immediate combat action in the Channel were those 15 deployed from Brest. In the first days of the invasion, U-955, U-970, U-490, U-980, U-373, U-629, U-740 and U-821 were sunk. The latter 4 boats had sailed from Brest. 4 returning boats without snorkels, U-415, U-989, U-963 and U-256 had narrowly escaped destruction by pure chance. The fate of the remaining boats that had sailed on June 6th was unknown at the time. However, of the 5 other snorkel-equipped boats sent from the Atlantic to the Channel, only 2 arrived in the operational area. Thus, within a few days during the initial phase of the invasion, at least 12 submarines had been sunk or disabled. U-415 was dry docked within 48 hours, and virtually all machinery and most equipment required overhaul or complete replacement. From our crushed pressure hull to the 2 bent shafts, everything on board was scrap. My XO had compiled a list of nearly 500 items urgently in need of repair. However, the list was trimmed down to 55 items. The reason was a lack of spare parts, manpower, and time. Every available boat had to be returned to the front as soon as possible, even if only marginally operational. And so, in complete disregard of the front's requirements, it was determined that U-415 had to be ready for a new mission within 2 or 3 weeks. At this point, I considered the absence of a snorkel absolutely fatal. As work progressed aboard, I tried once again to have an air mast installed in my boat, but my desperate efforts met with insurmountable resistance. I attempted again to requisition a truck to conduct my hunt for a snorkel system myself, but a journey overland was deemed too dangerous. And so, the snorkels remained lying at the Montparnasse freight yard, where they rusted away. Like these air masts, other equipment and spare parts were in such short supply that it was decided to cannibalize U-256 and use its machinery and materials to refit U-415, U-989 and U-413, which had entered port heavily damaged on the night of June the 9th. They were to be combat ready again. Brauer, the commander of U-256, then decommissioned his boat and traveled with his crew to Germany to take over a new boat. After Brauer's departure, Sachse, Boddenberg, von Rothenberg and I were temporarily the last commanders in Brest. I realized that those who were giving us orders had lost their good judgment, but we were raised in the tradition of obedience to follow orders even when they were unreasonable. We knew that with our snorkeless boats we only had one future: death in our iron coffins. During the 2nd and 3rd week of the invasion, the Anglo-American forces strengthened their positions on the Cotentin Peninsula and then suddenly broke through our front at 2 points and pushed westward. New divisions were thrown into the battle. We continued to hope that our new lines would hold, but meanwhile, the submarine war deteriorated further. U-247, a snorkel boat, was forced to return to base by 2 destroyers before it could penetrate the channel. U-269, commanded by Uhl, also a snorkel boat, was sunk near the English south coast. 5 boats without snorkels eventually left their Norwegian ports, but were sunk in rapid succession. By June the 30th, our submarine operations since the beginning of the landing were in complete disarray. To destroy the small number of 6 freighters and 4 frigates, 22 submarines were sacrificed in the most critical phase of the battle. During the last days of June, leadership presented me with an unwelcome, untimely surprise. 3 very young and completely inexperienced officers were assigned to the boat to take the places of the older, experienced veterans. The young men were to receive their first and possibly their last glimpse of submarine warfare. My crew greeted the newcomers with a healthy dose of doubt and skepticism. The loss of my qualified chief engineer left a gap that only I could fill. The weight of responsibility for the boat and the men became even heavier under this new burden. And then, in early July, U-415 was declared ready for deployment. On the eve of my new mission, I received a letter from home. It said that my parents had moved into a new apartment in the center of Darmstadt with Trudel, and that my sister was expecting a child soon. The news about the baby was delightful. However, I disapproved of father's decision to settle back in a large city that attracted enemy bombers like a beehive attracts bees. In my last letter home, I explained my viewpoint to father and urgently asked him to reconsider his decision. I didn't mention how little I believed in my own chance of surviving the immediate future, and against my conviction, I ended the lines with my wishes for a reunion soon. Herbert has made it once again. The amount of sheer luck and good fortune this man has is truly incredible. If you thought Das Boot was exaggerating the struggle of being stuck underwater, now you know that things like this really happened. And Herbert himself isn't exaggerating either. I have looked up U-415's war diary and will put the corresponding pages on screen. It's practically verbatim from what he says in the book. You can read his desperation between the lines. Anyway, D-Day has happened and we all know that the war will end soon. We'll see how it turns out for our boy, and I will see you in the next episode. Cheers.